So, same thing. It's okay to do it like this, but as long as you hold the cage in place so that the bearing doesn't spin. But more preferable is either go from this end or that end, or even both for that matter. Now just let me say, this is a messy job, so be prepared to get dirty. Same kind of situation. Just once again, make sure that there's no crud left in any of the bearings. This is the whole point of it. If you leave any solvent in there, you will end up destroying the bearing because it can't get proper lubrication. Alright, so now that we've got everything cleaned up, it's time to start packing the bearings. Now you're going to want to start with your outer bearing here. So this is where your big thing of grease comes along. So be sure that your hands are completely clean, or you got a new set of gloves on. And now what we'll do is we're going to open up our grease. Now this is where it's going to get really, really messy. So make sure you have your paper towel. Now I've seen people do this wrong a lot. So make sure that you do this correctly, because this is very, very important. So you take your bearing, okay? Get your bearing. So you're going to take 2 fingers. Take a dollop of grease. You put that grease in the palm of your hand, like that. I'm right-handed. I'm going to use my right hand to pull the bearing and my left hand to have the grease in it. So then what I do is this back side of the bearing with a large opening on the cage, I'm going to turn it around so that it is facing me. I'm going to put my finger through it like that, and I'm going to hold the cage in place. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the bearing, and I'm actually going to pull it through the grease in my hand. That might be a lot of grease, and you keep pulling it through just like that until you start to see a little bit of grease come through. So, and you just repeat this process many, many times. So sometimes you want to take that and put it back in the palm of your hand. Try not to spin the bearing, because then you won't know where you finish packing. So you basically just continue doing this. Now you see what I mean by this gets messy, right? Now you don't want to cover the outside of the bearing so much. The idea is to get the grease in between the race and the cage. That's the whole idea of packing bearings. So don't just smear grease all over it. Pack the bearing correctly, and these things will live a very long life. Now, if you're concerned you're not getting enough grease in there, you can go around the horn one more time, or if you can't really tell where you've greased, just keep packing and you'll eventually see it fill up. Like, see all that right there? So I know that this bearing is starting to fill up with grease. And this is exactly what you want it to look like. Now, I've seen people, they slap the bearing through the grease. I don't really like that method because, once again, it makes even more of a mess. This way you can just kind of feel that you're pushing the grease into the bearing, but basically that's all you have to do is just kind of pull the bearing through the grease and use lots of grease. Don't be afraid to get real dirty doing this, because that means you're doing it right. So get in there and just, get dirty. That's the way to do this. So go around the horn a couple times and make absolutely sure that you got grease and everything, because this is the most important part. Because if you go and drive this away and pull this thing away and it's not packed properly, you could end up with a bearing failure on the side of the road. And you may end up losing your toys that are on the trailer, which would be very heartbreaking, I'm sure. So that's basically how you pack a bearing. I'm going to pack the other one and get cleaned up before we start the next step. Okay, so now that your hands are still really greasy, what you're going to want to do, oh man, so you're going to want to take the hub. Now, as you can see what my hands look like, take as much of the grease off your hands as you possibly can, because it's going to be all over the place. Just like this. Wipe it off. And then you take a dollop of grease and you're going to put it past the race of the bearing and just into this little dead area right in the middle of the hub. And you're going to want to make sure that the amount of grease in there is actually level with the races. And this is very, very important. because when the grease melts out of the bearing, because when you drive it, it'll heat up, that grease inside the hub is going to take the place of the grease that melts out of the bearing. So while you're at it, put a little bit of grease on the races. This is the front side of the hub. So now what I'll do is I'll turn it over, and once again we're going to fill this hub up as much as we can with grease, and put a little bit, I don't know if you can see that really well, but what we're going to do, I'll take a glove off and show you, is this outer race here, we're going to take, once again we're going to put some grease on the outer race. And this area here, take my gloves off. Oh, that's nasty. Dirty job. Ugh. Alright, what we'll try to do is, as you can see here, I have grease on the race here. That's what you want. Now this area here, you don't want grease. So, you know, it's not absolutely imperative that it's squeaky clean, but just make sure that you don't have a excessive amount of grease. But you see how much grease I put in the hub? You want lots of grease in the hub. I cannot stress this enough. You know, don't go too overkill on it, but make sure that it's at least level with the bearing races inside there. So there we go. Now what we're going to do is we're going to install the wheel seal. So in order to do this, what we're going to do first, so I'm going to set this back up on the trailer here to get our overhead viewpoint. We're going to take our packed outer bearing and we're going to drop it into its respective place. Then we're going to take a little bit of grease. I'll try to zoom in just a little bit. Oops. So what we're going to do, take some grease and we're going to actually smear it so it basically forms like a smooth kind of connection here, smooth kind of line all around this outer hub of the bearing here, just like that. And that'll prevent all the grease from basically squishing out when you first try to, or when you first head down the road. I don't know if it's entirely true, but that's just the way I've been taught and that's the way I do it. So once again, we're going to clean this little area up because that's where the grease seal is going to sit. Now, what we're going to do, there we go. Now what we're going to do is we're going to install the wheel seal without destroying it. So this wheel seal here, that's the new wheel seal. It's a little thicker than the old one, but that's okay because there's lots of room in there. So what we'll do is we'll get it sitting in there, and then we're not going to force it, we're just going to give it some gentle love tapping to get it in there. Because if we force it, we're going to end up wrecking the grease seal, and we're going to have to go back to Lordco to go get a new one. So easy does it. You just kind of work your way around. And you start to hear it hitting the hub, and when it's flush there, then you know that you're level with the hub and you're all good now. See how the grease seal here is level with the hub, just like that. They're the same height. The bearing is in there correctly and it spins within there. It's going to be a little bit stiff because of all the grease in there, but that's basically the outer side of the seal. And it's the same thing with the inner seal, the wheel bearing there, and it's the same story with the outer one, except you don't have a wheel seal to install. Same kind of situation. Make sure that you wipe all that in there, just like that, to make it nice and smooth. Now it's not really crucial that you get all the grease off of this side, but the less grease and crap you have in here, the less you're going to end up in your dust cap. And you are going to end up with some in your dust cap. It's just a fact of life. But once again, you don't want to end up with a whole crap load in there. So now that our hub is ready to go back on, we're going to clean up the spindle here. Okay, so now that we're done the wheel seal there, what we're going to do is take our paper towel and clean the spindle off. Just like this. Now, this little back piece here, which is a bit of a step, you want to make sure that this is quite clean because that's where your seal is going to ride. I'll get you close up with that. So this little step, make sure it's clean and not pitted, because if it's pitted or wrecked in any way, shape, or form, that's going to blow the grease seal up very quickly. So, put that right there. Now what we're going to do, it's almost time to put the hub back on. Before we do that, we're going to put a light coating of grease on this spindle here. You don't need to go too hog wild on this here, but just put a liberal amount on there, just kind of for fun. And then what we're going to do is the leftover remaining little bit of grease on your fingers, you're just going to put a little bit, just a very thin coating right here on the back side on this little step here. That's going to allow the grease seal to sit in properly. Same thing with this, with the hub here, is put a very thin, kind of nice little coating of grease on the inside of this seal lip. Now what we're going to do is very carefully, without kind of bashing that up, we're just going to ease that in there, and the bearing should just slide on the shaft, and ever so carefully, kind of going to rotate that guy a little bit till you feel it sit on there correctly. Oh, there we go. Make sure that inner bearing or the outer bearing's pushed on properly like that, and there we go. Now that's it. Now we're just going to wipe that grease in there like that. This is a messy job, remember. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take our thrust washer. Now you're going to orient it with the side. Now you may have a groove in that like it's been worn out a little bit. That's sitting on the bearing basically, so we're going to take a little bit of grease and we're going to lubricate the thrust washer just a little bit like that. A little bit on the other side as well. You don't need to go too hog wild on the other side. So this guy's going to slide on here like that. Okay. Next, if you have a lock washer like me, next we're going to install a lock washer after I straighten that tab out that got bent in the beginning. There we go. Now that tab washer is going to sit on there. What we're going to do, just going to tap those guys on there and make sure they stay on there. Now it's time for the nut. Now we're going to have to set what's called a preload on this. So this is the most difficult part of this. It's not really that hard, but you have to pay attention to what you're doing. It's very important that you get your preload right, or else your bearing is not going to sit right on there. So I'm going to flatten these guys back out. We'll come back and do the preload. Alright, so here we go. I finally got that stupid nut back on properly. So what we'll do, now we'll take our channel lock pliers. If that doesn't work, we'll take the big socket. We're just going to basically run this nut in. Now don't kill it. In fact, don't even put any real hard pressure on it. As you're doing it, make sure you spin the hub a little bit to keep the bearings free in there. Basically now what you're doing is you're now spinning the seal on. So all of a sudden you're going to feel it go tight. And now this hub should be very hard to move, as you can see right here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to back it off about a quarter turn. Once again, the hub's going to spin really freely. This is the tricky part now. What we're going to do is you're going to tighten this thing by hand. Yes, you heard me correctly, by hand, as you're spinning this thing forward. And basically, what you want to do is you want to make your the hole in your pin line up. So if you have to go a little forward, a little backward, that's the way to go. But basically, as tight as you possibly can, hand tight, while spinning it forward. And there you just set your preload correctly. Okay, so now that you have the preload set correctly, now if you over tighten your preload, you could end up basically burning your bearings up. But if your preload's not tight enough, your hub is going to flop back and forth. So what you're going to do is, if you got a tab washer like me, you take this guy and you're going to bend the tab up so that it'll prevent that lock nut, that castle nut from moving. And then what we'll do is, what some people like to do is, you see how I got a grease fitting there, you like to grease the crap out of it, but really because we packed it with so much grease you don't have to. And I believe that's one of the reasons why it blew the grease seal in the first place, is there's too much pressure inside there. The old school bearing buddies that they used to have used to do that all the time. So basically you might want to hit that maybe once every few months with just 2 or 3 shots of grease. You don't have to kill it once again. And you might want to repack your bearings about every couple years maybe. If you got a boat, well, you might want to do it a little more often because it goes in and out of the water all the time. So now I'm just going to put our dust cap back on. Try not to beat all this stuff up too much. And that little rubber plug. Just like that. There you go. You've just done your wheel seals. So now what we'll do is we'll put the wheel back on and send it out the door. Okay, so that's how you repack your wheel bearings in a nutshell. Now make sure before you start that you know what you're doing. If you're not confident in what you're doing, get somebody else to do it. It's good to learn, but once again, if you're gonna, don't screw up on this, because this would be catastrophic. If that wheel blew off, I'd lose both these guys, and there's no insurance on them that basically governs if they get written off because they've been towed somewhere. The other thing is, make sure you pack the bearings properly. Once again, go around a couple of times and double, triple check that they're packed properly. Fill the hub full of grease. Make sure that it is at least level with the races. And if you don't feel confident enough that there's enough grease in there, and you have a grease fitting or zert fitting in the end, pop a couple shots in there. It doesn't really matter. You know, I prefer not to. It just makes a bit of a mess. But that's basically it. Keep your tire pressures up, and you should be good. So, once again, if you're not confident in how to do this, then don't do it. Okay, if you have any other requests on stuff that you'd like me to do, I had a request for transmission fluid changing. Unfortunately, I don't have one to do right now. I may have a Honda coming up soon, but I will go over the theory because you asked about it. So if you have anything else you want me to do, or anything ATV, boat, car related, that kind of thing, drop me a line on leave a comment, and I'd be happy to do that. And yeah, thanks for watching. Enjoy your weekend. Ride safe. All right. Take it easy, everybody.